Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining into this webinar. I hope you are well and ready to go. My name is Andrew Tsuro, as I've shared earlier, and I will be facilitating this session for you and as we engage on the elements to do with emotional intelligence. What a trivial, or at least what a very big topic to be covering at this time where the world is in turmoil. We're not so sure what's happening. But question is, are we aware of how our emotions are at this stage? And this is what I hope from this masterclass, we should be able to identify our own emotions as they are currently, but most importantly, identify how they are being displayed to our colleagues, our workmates, or personally in our personal relationships. And most importantly, how then do we navigate the conflict of emotions and relationships that we have in the spaces? As we go through, I will be sharing with you a few elements relating to intrapersonal. This is the discovery of self and how it affects emotional intelligence or how it relates to emotional intelligence. Then we will look into the interpersonal relationship, how we interact with others as we look into that space. And then last but not least, we will look at how we can navigate the conflict that arises as a result of that and how we can deal with it in depth. And hopefully out of this call, you should be able to identify one or two or three techniques that you can apply to start your journey with emotional intelligence. Bear in mind, emotional intelligence is a skill and no skill is learned at one go. Training or behavioral change is not an event, but a process, and we decide the process and how long that process will take. So I'm hoping that in this call, you'll be able to benefit. As I've explained earlier, if you have any questions in between and the conversation that's happening, feel free to use the chat screen that is at your disposal, and I will definitely take time to look at that. But in between, I will open up and ask for questions so that you may then contribute and ask any questions you may have. And if there's anything that you feel you might need clarity on, feel free to put it up and then I'll be able to help. Having said that, let us delve right into emotional intelligence. I want you to consider closing your eyes for the next 10 seconds, simply 10 seconds, and try and come with the best description of how you are feeling right now. In 10 seconds, describe or try and identify the feeling that you're feeling currently and give us the best description of it. I'll give you 10 seconds. I'll tell you when to start and when to stop. All right. Having said that, let's stop. In the chat box, please type in the emotion that was prominent in your thoughts whilst your eyes were closed. What was the most prominent emotion that you came up? How are you feeling currently? I'll be watching the chat box. Calm. Thank you, Renee. I love that one. Relaxed. Thank you, Sanri. Energetic. Thank you, Madeleine. Happy. Thank you, Enode. Other contributions. What is the emotion? Please share with us on the chat box. At ease. Thank you, Christopher. And thank you for joining us all the way from Zambia. Somewhat calm and at ease. Thank you, Almarie. Thank you for that clarity. All right. So as these emotions come up, I want us to look and try and identify what is it that we call emotional intelligence and how does it relate to what we are really experiencing at this present moment. Emotional intelligence can be defined as the way we apply our emotions in situations. And most importantly, it comes prevalent and most paramount when we're looking at situations that are testing, trying, and possibly getting us into our uncomfortable zones. That is where we see the beauty and the impact of emotional intelligence when we are under pressure. And what allows us to then be able to know what emotion to give at what stage, at what time, to who, how, is a critical skill that has been determined to be very prevalent and important in society, be it in the workplace and perhaps in our personal relationships. We're experiencing high levels of depression in this world globally. We're experiencing high levels of stress because of the somewhat fast-paced world that we're in. And the ability to be able to understand and detect clearly how we feel and where it comes from is a skill. But how to translate it becomes the greatest skill that we want to master as we work on this. Now, when we talk of emotional intelligence at the very core, we are simply speaking about our ability to identify how we feel. Now, how do you feel? In emotional intelligence, we speak of the 6 basic emotions. So all our emotions are said to come from these 6 basic elements. Now, I always share that it's almost as though we've found synonyms and we've found other expressive words to say it. And you notice that in the English language, where we really look into this, we've got either you're happy, either you're sad, either you're fearful, either you're disgusted, either you're angry, or you might be surprised. If you look at this, these are very basic emotions, and very few of you, at least one person, was able to identify with this. Now, does it mean that the emotion you're feeling right now, for those that say they're calm, for those that say they're relaxed, does it necessarily mean you are out of your width or you're out of your bandwidth? No. But what it necessarily entails is it is emanating, the foundation of emotions comes from these 6. Other books or other references will tell you there are 8, but we focus on these 6. And primarily, why these 6? Because they open up a plethora of other emotions. Now, this is where we then get to the point where you shared with me how you really feel. And the plethora of emotions, or the plethora of emotions, speaks to, if you look at the 6 in the core, so this is the core where you can see my mouse hovering around. Those are the 6 main emotions that we spoke of, right? But if you turn into one, when we talk about maybe anger comes from the hurt. You are hurt about by something that is really not what you wanted to experience, or you feel threatened, right? And when you feel threatened, we're looking at there's something that you are threatened by. Now, interestingly, when you are angry and you are threatened, it's different from when you are fearful and you feel scared. Then you feel terrified. Can you take note of how there is a very thin line between how emotions are received and are perceived in the outer world? Now, our challenge with emotional intelligence is to be able to identify the foundation. Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you surprised? Are you fearful? Are you angry? And when you identify all that, you're now going into depth to say, all right, if I go outside, how is it coming out? It's coming out as aggressive. It's coming out as being mad. It's coming out as being hurt. It's coming out as being distant. It's coming out as being frustrated. And now, and we do that, and you may recognize this in your workspace, with your work colleagues, that is where we then get to a point where you now want to understand, wait a minute, tell me more about how you're feeling. Tell me more about, and you unpack those emotions. And when we unpack those emotions, it's an opportunity for us to go right back and identify what it is that we're feeling and how it makes an impact to the people around us. In many cases, these are the emotions that we ought to be looking out for at points where we are either under pressure or at points as to when things are not going our way. We need to be looking out for how it is. Now, why is this important in emotional intelligence? It's simply important because the moment you understand yourself, or the moment you understand how you're feeling, you then become a better contribution to society. An example that we always get, and especially in this community or in this country or in this continent where we're experiencing high levels of abuse or social ills, we're looking at someone who is abusive. Someone who's abusive will find themselves in a position where maybe they are feeling rejected. But that comes from fear, right? But sometimes maybe they are feeling frustrated by something that's not working out for them. And what then makes it a scenario or a challenge is when that person is unable to identify the emotion. So how do you really feel? And to determine how you really feel, one exercise that I generally recommend to people, which is a great exercise that has helped me in managing my emotions in many spaces, is when you start off your day, and this is where I speak of an experience where when you start off your day, you identify your emotions and you try and look into that. But how do you do this? Firstly, before we look at what we call your reflection cycle, the first thing that I want you to look into is to look at your past experiences. Where do your emotions really emanate from? Many of us, we possibly hate adventure because the very first time you were asked to ride a bicycle, you failed. You fell. The very first time you were asked to do high jump or something that was out of your natural routine, you struggled. So now your past experiencing determines either your belief or your emotion about a certain element. Take myself for an example. There are certain foods that I just do not love having. Perhaps because the first time I had a certain type of food, it did not, I reacted badly to it. A very easy instance for me is talking about seafood. The very first time I remember or I recall having seafood or fish for that matter, I had a rash. Now, whether that rash was caused by something else, the fact that I can relate having fish with that rash really makes me believe or think that I'm allergic to seafood. So whether you bring any other type of seafood, I've already bulked it to that. Now, in the workspace, you are dealing with emotions that have come from past experiencing, and that's where the challenge really comes in. You're dealing with people who have developed certain feelings and thoughts because of their past experiences. Perhaps they were in a different job or employment where they were used to having their way around with anything. And when they had their way around with anything, they felt at ease. Do you realize the channel now? Because of a certain experience, they felt a certain emotion. They felt trusted. They felt depended on. They felt reliable. And then on the other hand, they believe already that leaders will give them an opportunity to take on anything at their ease, allows them to have a more open-minded type of engagement. This is where we talk about their thoughts about who are the better leaders. Are the better leaders autocratic, democratic, bureaucratic? They now have all these thoughts or beliefs about who the better person would be. If your experience is that leaders are born and not made because you come from an experience where you've realized that leaders from this type of family are like that, you are able to identify that. Now, where does emotional intelligence really hit home in this case? It hits home when at work you have a superior. And I usually love giving this example of, you've got a superior who possibly, for lack of a better example, you don't like the way they dress, right? And now, because you don't like the way they dress, it has influenced you to want to deal with that matter because they are not representing you in the best way as you would accept. Or perhaps this person you don't approve of them because you've seen how other, or your beliefs around how other leaders should portray themselves is different from how you expect it to be. So what then happens is you want to go and approach that leader and tell them, you should not be dressing like that. You should wear a suit and tie at all times. On the other front, you might also want to go and tell them, have you considered dressing like this with the best of intentions? But remember, our words carry containers of emotions. Our words carry containers of emotions. What does this mean? Every word you give out or every word you say is containing an emotion or contains emotions. Now, it's not about what you are saying, it's how you say it, but what's more important, and this is where we need to realize and be more cognizant if we're to be emotionally intelligent, it is how will it be received? You may have the best of intentions, but if it's not received with the best of intentions, then there has already been a communication breakdown. And how do you identify this? It's by seeing how then the feelings that come out of it. It's how you are perceived in the workspace or how you're perceived by your colleagues. Are you perceived as someone who's always grumpy or someone who is very much a snob just because you keep to yourself? Or perhaps are you perceived as someone who is just always happy, always smiling, nothing ever goes wrong in your life because you're always on cloud 9? And by you being able to identify this plethora of emotions as we recognize them in the previous chat or in the previous screen, where you look into my anxiety, where does it come from? Does it come from being overwhelmed or being worried? We are likely able to start hitting the surface, to start digging in from that platform, to start digging into then identifying, okay, they're feeling overwhelmed or they're feeling frightened. Could it be that they're anxious or they're scared? Okay, being that they're anxious or scared, what do I take? What are the steps that I can take to now go back and hit the core, and the core being those 6 primary emotions? What could I be doing? And this is the challenge you've got to then identify where you are. Now, in all this, it all leads to how it is seen. And this is where the real problem starts. Now, imagine if someone was angry and they didn't show it at all. Would you have any affection or any problem with that? Let's assume Andrew is angry, but he didn't show it at all. Would you have any problem with it? Likely not, because it is not affecting you. The only problem comes when I show behavior that affects the next person. Or perhaps I show behavior that affects myself. And this is where the challenge or the importance of emotional intelligence draws us in to say, am I cognizant of the feelings and or emotions, as well as the thoughts or beliefs that lead to the big thing, which is the behavior that I display? I always give an example of also a colleague of mine at some point who is prone to realizing that whenever he's wrong, he doesn't come through and tell you that I'm wrong. What he does is he finds a way to correct it immediately, and then he comes through and says, this is how it's supposed to be actually. I made a mistake earlier. They're not telling you that they were wrong, even though you may have guided them earlier on. But what it is that they're doing is they want to remove the element of feeling inferior or removing the inferiority complex on them, or from themselves, so that they may be seen in society in a different light. Now, this is important for us to recognize, because if you want to now come and highlight it to them that you were wrong, admit it, you were wrong, what happens is they retaliate. And when they retaliate, this is where the clash or conflict really breaks out. But sometimes you've got to ask yourself, just like the earlier example I gave of a person or of your superior manager or leader who is not presenting themselves well from an image point of view, you must now ask yourself, what outcome do I want? But as you look into that, you're simply asking yourself, at the end of the day, am I the right person to try and convince this person to think in another way? Am I the person to guide this person or to tell this person how to dress? And my answer in most cases is, if you ask yourself what outcome, if you want a change in behavior, it's not always that Andrew is the right person to do it. I'm not always being the right person. Sometimes in emotional intelligence, it means you being the silent partner in the change process. What does a silent partner do? A silent partner will not say anything, but may use their effort or their influence to change a certain behavior. Now, a typical example in this would be, you are now going to approach a friend called John. John, please help Andrew, who is the superior in this case, to change the way they present themselves. Now, you're going to use John. Your smart move is in using John as the vehicle. Why so? Because you realize that Andrew respects John more. And because Andrew respects John more, you now want John to be the one who delivers the message. But because if it was going to come from me and going directly to Andrew, the challenge is Andrew might see this as being insubordinate. He might see it as being rude or disrespectful. And again, that's not my intention, but that's how he receives it. And you've got to now think about, how is it received? What's the intention that's received at the end of the day? And from that, you then be able to identify some of the elements that need to be looked into when you look into that. So in a nutshell, what are we saying? We are simply saying, with your reflection cycle, you've got to realize that the behavior that you see is as a result of feelings or emotions that are coming out, or thoughts or beliefs about the situation at hand. And when you want to dive further, you might go down deeper into realizing that it's as a result of past experiences that this person may have experienced or may have gone through. And this is why if you go into a psychologist, or if you go for some therapy and they want to identify your abusive behavior, they then eventually unpack certain issues like a troublesome child upbringing, possibly abusive, being in an abusive family or relationship, or whatever the case is, but there is an underlying manner. And this also goes back to the element of the 6 basic emotions. They had a sad upbringing, and hence that is the case. Or in their family line, this is what it has been. And looking into this, how can we then get to a position where we can start changing some of these things? Yes, you can change the way you then behave by simple exercises or techniques. The one that I'm going to share here, because of time, is really one that I call the Sun Challenge. With the Sun Challenge, what you do is you consider, and it's related to meditation for many of those that may have embarked on this, but what you simply try and do is every morning, before anything that you do, you then try and get yourself into a very private or secluded area of your space. It could be in your home, it could be in the lounge, or it could be the dining room, or it could be somewhere extremely private, or at least somewhere where it's secluded. No one can bother you. Even if you're playing hide and seek, that place where you would hide and no one would expect to find you, that is where you would ideally go. When you get into that space, for a moment, on average, we say it works for approximately 10 minutes, but for a moment, try it out. It's very difficult to stay 10 minutes off, but for a moment, just zone out. And zoning out, techniques to help you zone out, it could be just by focusing on your inflow and outflow of breath. Focusing on your inflow and outflow of breath. And secondly, it would be closing your eyes and let your emotions wander, or let your thoughts wander. As you do that, what you're simply doing is acknowledging the way you feel, the way you are, or at what point you are in. And what's likely to happen is you're going to then start unpacking. As time goes by, you start unpacking how you really feel deep down, because you can't lie to yourself. You don't have any other distractions. If you're in a public space, what happens is, if you are feeling sad and someone comes up with your favorite drink, or with your favorite story, or something that's exciting, you usually quickly shut down that emotion and then focus on what has come through. But when you are secluded in your secluded area, what happens is you allow yourself to be authentic with self. And when you're authentic with self, you then build up an opportunity to now address the exact very same challenge or very same emotion that you have. Acknowledging it being the very first step in identifying or taking that step towards emotional intelligence. They say knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and understanding that emotion that you are feeling and acknowledging that it's there is the very first step to being emotionally intelligent. I'm going to take a few questions at this point, if there are any. If none, please feel free to type none. If there's something that you want clarity on, feel free to let me know and I'll be happy to help. If you want to share anything, please go ahead and do so. Great to note, Madeleine. Awesome. Okay, cool. So it seems like we are on a roll. If someone is typing a long message, if you feel like you're typing a long message, feel free to unmute yourself and then share as we go. Hi, Renee. Yes, I would be able to send you the slideshow of this after the session. Most welcome. Having said that, or having looked into this now, hopefully by so doing, you can start your journey. Obviously, there's a whole lot more that we can unpack relating to this, but this is the reflection cycle that we're simply saying that it starts from your experience, and your experience could be boiled down to the 6 basic emotions of how you grew up. I always share that it's almost an example, especially in the workspace, where you meet someone when they're 25 years old or 30 years old. That is 30 years of experience of different emotions. And now, in many cases, you want to take on the challenge of helping that person. When you take on the challenge of helping someone who has got 30 years of experience in emotion, in different emotions, you've got to prepare yourself to put in 30 years of, or in figuratively, 30 years of effort or work into it. You cannot change just like that. Sometimes you've got to identify that it's going to take a lot of work to reverse a cycle. And in meditation, they talk about approximately, I think if it's 11 hours, I think that it takes to change the mindset or the brain to believe into something new. So if you are going to take that on, you would look into 11 hours of consistent, not necessarily at one go, but having taken 11 hours of consistent application of a certain new way or application of mindset for you to have that change. And that is where we say you've got those experiences that you want to change and move out from. And when you look into that, you're looking into the feelings and emotion that are being shown or that are being felt, and you want to acknowledge them. When you acknowledge them, you then see the change in the behavior. So when you look into that, And also, you can also look into the thoughts and beliefs that are coming through, and then you can see the behavioral change. But remember, a different experience can also change emotions or thoughts almost immediately. So if I was on a bicycle when I was young, and then somehow I'm forced to be on a motorbike at 25 years of age, then what's going to likely happen is I'm going to have a different feeling or emotion about the same experience or a similar experience. And now it will showcase in the difference in the behavior that I display from then on. So you've got to identify and realize that you've got to create a new experience. If you're a leader in your team, you've got to realize that if your team members are feeling something different, you've got to change the experience. If they were experienced in dealing with sadness or loss or untrusted behavior, you've got to change that experience by bringing up the opposite experience so that you can see or you can experience the behavior that you want out of it. And that is what we look into. So this is more relating to the reflection cycle. It can be unpacked more, you can read more about it, or you can then go into an emotional intelligence program that will be much more valuable in taking you through the journey. Remember, it's a skill. It's not just an easy, quick switch. Looking into interpersonal intelligence. Now, on interpersonal intelligence, I want us to focus on one main element in this case, and this is the talk of empathy in action. Now, what is empathy? Any thoughts on the chat box? What is empathy? Or if you wish to unmute yourself, please feel free to unmute yourself and contribute. What would you consider as empathy? Bear in mind, there are no wrong or right answers, or no wrong answers. Thank you, Philip. Understanding others' view. I love the word understanding there. Other contributions? How would you define empathy, or how would you relate to empathy? Or have you ever felt empathetic to someone, or have you ever been, if someone ever shown empathy to you? Let's go, let's go, let's go. I would love to hear your thoughts around empathy. To place yourself in that person's shoes. Lovely. I love that. To place yourself in that person's shoes. I love that, Peter. Thank you so much. Same as sympathy, but you have to have had the same experiencing. Okay, cool. I love that because you brought something that I was going to bring up anyway around the solved or possible thoughts around the differences between empathy and sympathy. Putting yourself in another person's place. Beautiful, I love that. Now, when you look at some of your responses, they are all right and really in the same vein. But what I want to focus more on is something that Peter brought up to say, same as sympathy, but you have to have had the same experience. And what are we talking about this, and why are we bringing this up? We're talking of sympathy. Sympathy is, I'm sorry about it, but I generally don't understand what it is. I can tell it's not working for you. I'm sorry about your loss, but I've never lost someone who I love, so I can only be sorry. I cannot, and this is where you find phrases like, I cannot imagine what you're going through. This is where you get such phrases when it's sympathy, right? And we need it also. But empathy is, I understand what you are going through. Now, I want to bring this in the vein of understanding be the key word here. And some of us have used the words of being in another person's shoe, or putting yourself in another person's shoe, and others in another person's place. And what are we trying to get to there? We're simply trying to get to a position where we are understanding of the situation. We are part of the situation. Instead of saying, I realize what you're doing over there, it's almost to say, I'm here with you. I am here with you. I'm experiencing it with you, or I want to experience it with you. And this is a very big component of emotional intelligence, especially when we talk of the interpersonal relationships that we build. We want people to be there with us, not just in spirit. We want to be there together. Let's face this together. And I think the married people would understand more. You have to go through it together. And for you to get past it, you've got to go through it to get past it. Not just one person should and say, I'll cheerlead you on. It is almost as though you want to go through that journey with that person. Now, in the workspace, it becomes quite complex because that's a lot of commitment that you'd have to do to show empathy in action. Now, I am a fan of learning more relating to relations and behavioral elements. And I was learning about a user experience model that is used by the likes of Nielsen, which is a global leader in user experience and marketing and connecting of data and understanding how it is. And they've got this model that I'm showing on your screen, which allows them to try and understand and empathize with their clientele or their users. And what you want to do with this, and I'm going to transform it and bring it into emotional intelligence. I hope I do it well. But in essence, for them, it is so that they understand how their clients relate. Or how their clients are feeling, and so that they can respond to their clientele. They want to draw this data and then feed that animal that they are trying to feed using the data that they collect from them. Now you're going to notice we've got the user here. The user says something, the user thinks about something, the user feels some way, and the user does something. Now, when we're talking of empathy in action and as leaders, we want you to be able to understand or to listen. And this is one part. Listen to what this person is saying. Now, when you listen to what this person is saying, I always also want to come back and give an example to say, with no offense whatsoever, this is where it said, when a lady says, I'm all right, I'm okay. Right? There's a whole lot more. I think the gentleman on the call would agree that it's said, and maybe some of the ladies may too also agree that there's a whole lot more to that statement than what it is. If it was a book, we would say read in between the lines. What is not being said? So in this case, we're simply saying, as the person in leadership who's practicing interpersonal intelligence or emotional intelligence with empathy, you want to hear, you want to listen to what this person is saying. And when you listen to what this person is saying, remember, with the verbatim of words, there's an emotion. There's a lot that is carried in the tone, the pace. Run fast! Or run fast. There's a difference in what is being shared, right? There's some form of aggression in the letter, and there's a form of emergency in the first example. So you want to be able to understand or to listen into what is being said. Now, having said that, there is what is being said, and then there is also the quadrant of what is this person thinking. With the very same example, where in the letter I said, run fast. This person is thinking, you are slowing me down. This is not working. You are too damn slow, or any of those similar thoughts. That person is not thinking, oh, this person might have an injury. So I think that's why they're not running fast. It's different. They are not in a sympathetic tone, or they are not in a sympathetic thought at that point in time, or they are not empathizing with a possible situation. In that case, that person simply wants or is thinking in one way or the other. And they either don't care or they don't want to show that they care in any point. So they want to deliver that in that space. Now, when you look into that, you also come back into the element of understanding there's a same connotation that might be brought in when we talk about what the person is saying and how they are thinking. When you look into this, there's also an allowance to say, perhaps what they're saying is what they're thinking. Now, you would usually find this especially when you're dealing with assertive people. They say what they think. Assertive people will tell you, I am not in agreement with how you are saying this, but I just need it to be said, this is what I think needs to happen. But in most cases, and you will notice that generally in our society, we are now dealing with a lot of ills or social ills that have now, unfortunately, made more people become more passive. And we've got this cycle of passivity that is running. And when we're looking into this, you're now saying this person will not share their thoughts. I went to an engagement at some point in time. And when I got there, one of the big challenges they had was where they were going to or what they were going to do for their year-end function. And when they were looking into what they were going to do for their year-end function, what I realized is there were different groups, and religious groups were the best divider in what was happening. You had the Christians, you had the Islamic, you had for lack of a better, the Jewish. And what was happening is the Jewish want kosher meals, the Islamic want halal, strictly halal meals, and the Christians were somewhat indifferent. But in what was happening in that very intense debate was what eventually happened is the Islamic tended to then show no concern in terms of how then this process would end up. In essence, in their words, it's not going to help in any way. So they thought this is an argument that's happening, but it's not going to benefit me in any case. So why should I? And sometimes we do feel that way. But as a leader, you want or you do think that I might contribute this, but they don't appreciate it anyway. You might find yourself in a position where you need to look into that and see what is this person thinking and unpack that. And hence the questioning technique is a better tool than the telling technique in interpersonal communication. What are we saying? We're simply saying the more you ask questions, the more you get data on what it is. And you'll see that this is how the court cases or lawyers really work around it. To get to the truth, they ask a lot of questions. Some may be leading, some may be closed-ended questions, but they want to get as much out there so that then they can make it work. On the other side, this is why lawyers might advise you, just answer the question, don't say too much. Especially if you're guilty, they will tell you, don't say too much, just answer the question, because by answering the question, by saying more, you're opening up to the data that is being collected that may be used against you or in your favor, depending on what situation you find yourself in. But also, your thoughts and your feelings may then be related, or your thoughts may impact how you feel. Because you think these people will not listen, you might then feel despondent, you might then feel sad, you might then feel angry. There are so many ways to work around the feelings that you then build out of this. And what you then do and how you then feel may now come back into how you do something. So this is where you then have people on a go slow, or in our case in South Africa, I think we are prominent for, this is where you then find that people what do they call it? We are on a, is it a rally? Is it, we march, right? We cause a riot, we march, we do whatever it is to just showcase what we want to say, how we're thinking, and what our feelings are at this point in time. And as leaders, our challenge is to acknowledge what people say, listen to what people say, acknowledge that they're feeling differently, and realize what they're thinking before we experience the do. Because when the action is shown, they say action speaks louder than words. When the action is shown, this is where we are at the pivot, or we are at the zenith of the emotional and the emotion display, or the emotional display. This is where people showcase how they are doing it. And I always then bring it the same case to how we then acknowledge. So how do we then acknowledge and work with this? And in many cases, this is where I bring in the concept of, as leaders, you want to show that you care. You want to say it. You want to make them think, because already if I'm thinking you don't care, if I'm thinking you don't value me, if I'm thinking you don't share the same experiences as I have, there's already a disconnect. And when there's a disconnect, we cannot move together in sync. Whilst we all want to run 100 meters, I will sprint, someone else will jog, someone else will walk. But as a leader, you want to be moving in sync so that you then use the minimum energy to get to your destination. Because at the end of the day, you are working with others. You're not working in a silo. And they say that there is no problem with a naked man on a hill until someone else joins them. And this simply brings the point of, you are okay with your emotions. Whatever you learned, whatever your mother taught you growing up or in your upbringing, that's okay. But the moment you bring your mother's teachings into the workspace, and those teachings are different from another mother's teachings, then there is conflict. And now you want to deal with the conflict. You want to deal with the behavior, and yet you could have listened to what that person is saying, shown what the person is thinking, or paid attention to what that person is thinking, and acknowledged the feelings and emotions that are coming out of it. And so, which allows you to show empathy in action. So what is my challenge to you, or what is my proposal to you as leaders? To show interpersonal intelligence, or interpersonal relationships, to build on that, to show empathy, or at least using empathy as one of the biggest tools to mastering emotional intelligence, is to allow your teams or your people, or the people that you manage or that you lead, to have a say. And when we talk of listening, it's a very sensitive topic, because also you want to show that you're listening. You want to, you want to portray the element of listening. You don't want it to appear as though you are faking it. And I'm a very big fan of authenticity, because I do believe I'm one of the very sensitive people to any fake display of energy or action. I can easily pick up, or I easily can get to a conclusion that this was not authentic. An easy example is when someone says thanks, THANKS. That to me is not as authentic as thank you, despite that the sender of that communication might mean the very same thing. For me, it shows a difference. And I've come to that conclusion that that's how I relate. And as a result, how I then relate to people, it's very seldom that I would say thanks or TX or THX to someone else, because that comes or that sends a communication that I don't want. I want to show my emotion, and I want it to be genuine. And when that happens, you also reciprocate it, and it will be reciprocated to you. But in many cases, what you then don't find is people as leaders, we want to find shortcuts to these things. And we don't want to show the vulnerability side of it to allow that. And this is where then we miss the part of being empathetic. And in many cases, this is where we say leaders actually should show emotion. Because from that emotion, you show vulnerability, and that you're also human, and we can connect with it. Now, how does it relate back to the intrapersonal? You are so secure in how you're feeling that showing other people how you feel is not a challenge. You know already that this is how I feel. So, and you've accepted it, you've acknowledged it, which is the intrapersonal communication, the intrapersonal that we talked about in the phase one. Now you're showing it, or you're dealing with it, or you're accepting of other people's feelings. In many cases, because we ignore our inner intelligence, or our inner thoughts, our inner emotions, what then happens is we also don't want to acknowledge how others feel. And when we don't want to acknowledge how others feel, then we'll find ourselves in a position where we've got conflict. But before I go into how we then handle conflict or move from conflict to influence, I'm happy to take any questions at this stage. Any questions? If none, please feel free to write none. Thank you, Madeleine. Great, Christopher. Awesome. Okay. There are two reasons why people may say none. They just want it to end, or they're really following. I hope we're following. It's difficult to tell if we are on an online platform like this, but I'm hoping this is valuable to open up your mind into the world of emotional intelligence. Having said that, we now reach to a point, let's talk to a point where perhaps you did not recognize the inner, or you did not acknowledge your inner thoughts or emotions at the very first stage. You also did not realize or take time to practice showing emotion or showing empathy to the people around you. We now get to a point where we are now at a point of, from conflict, we've got conflict. Now, with conflict, there's really one way to it, in my opinion. And this is from moving from conflict to influence. Why influence? Because there's a certain outcome that we want to have. And on my screen, you will notice I will showcase the path and where we want to get to. And here, this is where I say begin with the end in mind. What is the end in mind for you? What outcome do you want to achieve? Now, in many cases, when you then are faced with a conflict situation, I want to challenge you as leaders, before you approach it, before you do anything about it, before you ask a friend, before you ask a mentor, before you ask your coach, before you ask any person, ask yourself and be honest with yourself. What outcome do I want to achieve out of this? What outcome do I want to achieve out of this? When you are clear with the outcome, you are now painting what the scenario will be like at the end of the day. You will realize in most cases, and this, you can cut my legs and quote me shorter, you realize in most cases, when you are clear with the outcome, your approach will be different. A lot of us, because we want to be the heroes of our own stories or our own situation, we don't take time to acknowledge the outcome that we want to see. And as a result of that, you find yourself in a position where you took a wrong turn and you're on a wrong direction, and that direction is full of potholes. And in emotions, I say there are gaps in emotions. There's everything. You've got sadness, you've got emptiness, you've got grumpiness, you are angry, and all that's packaged into one. And you call it frustration. And when you do that, unfortunately, you find yourself, you don't know what to work on. And if you then are clear on the outcome, find out what others are feeling. What is the others, in this case, thinking or looking at it as? So you're looking at, how does the next person, how does person B think about this outcome that I want? They're not in agreement. They don't buy into it. They're not willing to have it. All right, so how can I influence other to see this picture? For lack of a better example, I would love to give Cape Town as an example. when I look into my journey towards getting to Cape Town, I'm going to get to this mountainous place with two oceans converging and making it beautiful. Now that's the outcome. That's the picture at the end of the day. That's the picture I'm going to paint. But this friend of mine, who is others, does not see that. They want to go to the Victoria Falls. And when they see the Victoria Falls, they've got this waterfall that's there, and they've got these rocks and all the lights. Now, your challenge as self, because you are moving from conflict to influence, you want to acknowledge that they also have a great point, that seeing Victoria Falls would be amazing, would be beautiful, right? Because it's one of the 7 wonders. And you also have to acknowledge that, all right, do you realize that your outcome, okay, as self, this person seems like they want to go and experience the 7 wonders, one of the 7 wonders of the world being the Victoria Falls. So what is in it, in your outcome, that can substitute that? So for example, you can then say these Table Mountains. All right. And then it's not equally, because they are more of a water person. Oh, we've got 2 oceans and waves, whereas we don't have that. Oh, you can experience this, and now you build your case to ensure that this person is convinced. This person is convinced that the outcome is the best way forward. You cannot move forward if there are others in your way. There's a block. So what you want to do, otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to be pushing if ever you're going to get forward. And to push self into others to get to outcome is going to take a lot more energy out of you. It's almost like they say, arguing with a fool. The fool will beat you at it because they've got a lot of experience in arguments. And I love giving the example of, if you are going to go and to a pigsty and then say to pigs, pigs, I want you to start bathing as of today. I'm sure they will laugh at you and they will look at you with an insane mind. But if you take the chief pig and then take them as one person, get them to bath, and then they realize that, okay, after bathing, I don't feel itchy, I feel fresh, I feel energized. And then you take the pig to the place where others are, you will realize that instead of you doing the motivation or the influence, the chief pig is going to influence others to say, guys, we really need to bath. And as a result, your journey, instead of walking behind others, you and others are now in the same wavelength. They are now walking parallel towards the outcome that you want. And this is how you can then use some bit of emotional intelligence to transition from conflict to influence. Remember, it is the beginning with the end in mind. Thinking about how others perceive that end in mind, acknowledging how others perceive around it. And this is going back to the empathy element, and then having realized that, authentically influencing them to see it that way. Should you then work towards that? And sometimes you do get to a position where you realize the outcome may not specifically be what you thought it to be. You can then compromise and then change what the outcome would be. But that only happens if, firstly, you are clear with your own emotions. You are sure, you acknowledge how you feel and how that feeling is displayed. Secondly, when you have time and you have taken time to be empathetic to others by also acknowledging how they feel, how they see things, how they do things, and how they think about certain elements. And lastly, by then moving from a position where you are in conflict to a position where you are in influence. As leaders, I always challenge us to look into how we can be how we can be of best support to our emotional appeals that we find from our team members, our teammates, our colleagues, our family. We might be able to salvage a lot of challenges, and especially in this time where there's a lot of uncertainty. What are you doing to reassure and recommit your support to the people? authentically so. Be careful of the Andrews in your teams who are able to pick out on inauthenticity or who are able to pick out any sort of fakeness, even though they might be wrong. But that energy that they have, that thought that they may have, if you don't acknowledge it, if you don't work towards it, what will happen is you will see it in action by either being despondent or by either being withdrawn or by either eventually, in many cases, as I've noticed, you lose out on your greatest jewels simply because you took them for granted and you want to avoid that. Last but not least, as we look into this, we learn that in emotional intelligence, anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. And we've got to acknowledge that it is not easy to manage and to be always on top of your emotions. Every now and then, allow yourself to be human and practice humanity. But what's important is you acknowledge it. You are aware of it. Remember, the beginning of all wisdom is by knowing yourself first. Know yourself, and then you can move into others. That concludes my presentation for you for this morning. I hope this was helpful.